The rain had been falling for hours, turning the narrow dirt road into a river of mud and broken branches. Somewhere at the edge of the old forest near the small town of Willow Creek, a tiny German shepherd puppy stumbled along, soaked to the bone, his paws trembling with exhaustion. His name wasn't even known yet because no one had ever cared enough to give him one. He had been born in the backyard of a careless owner, someone who saw animals as nothing more than noise and trouble. His mother had done her best feeding her litter, keeping them warm under a crooked shed roof, but one by one the puppies had been given away to strangers, or worse, simply vanished. The little one left behind didn't understand any of it. All he knew was the world was big, cold, and unfriendly. Tonight was the worst yet. Thunder cracked above, sending the puppy scurrying beneath a fallen log, his tiny body shivering uncontrollably. He hadn't eaten since yesterday, and the last puddle he drank from tasted like rust and dirt. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the smell of rain and distant smoke from the town. The puppy whimpered softly, curling tighter into himself, trying to disappear into the shadows. He didn't know that fate was about to change everything. In the town, a young woman named Emily sat by her window, staring out at the storm. Her life had felt like this weather for months, dark, loud, and empty. She had moved here after losing her father, and the silence of her small house felt heavier with each passing day. Work kept her busy, but when evening came, the loneliness crept back and wrapping around her like cold vines. She didn't plan on leaving the house tonight, but something kept tugging at her thoughts like a quiet whisper, telling her to drive toward the edge of town. She argued with herself for 10 minutes before finally grabbing her coat and keys. The old truck groaned as it started, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. She didn't know what she was looking for until she saw him. Just off the road near the ditch, a small shape huddled under the log, barely moving. Emily slowed, her truck, heart clenching, when the beam of her headlights revealed two terrified brown eyes staring back at her. A puppy, out here alone in this storm. She pulled over without thinking, grabbing the umbrella from behind the seat. The moment she approached the log, the puppy tried to back away, his paws slipping in the mud, but he was too weak to run far. Emily knelt down, murmuring softly so her voice didn't scare him further. "Hey buddy, it's okay, I'm not gonna hurt you." The puppy froze, watching her every move. His ears drooped, water dripping from his tiny nose. Emily slowly reached out, giving him time to sniff her hand. When his cold little tongue touched her fingers, something inside her broke. She scooped him up, tucking him against her chest. The puppy didn't fight. He was too tired, too hungry, too desperate for warmth. Emily carried him to the truck, wrapping him in an old blanket from the backseat. As she drove home, she kept glancing at him, curled up beside her seat, shivering but silent. He hadn't made a sound since she picked him up, as if he was afraid making noise might make this kindness vanish. At home, Emily warmed some milk on the stove, tearing up an old towel to dry him. The puppy drank so fast she had to pull the bowl away twice so he wouldn't choke. When his belly was finally full, he climbed clumsily onto her lap side once and fell asleep. Emily stared down at the tiny creature, feeling something stir in her chest, something she hadn't felt in months. A reason to care again. A reason to come home to more than just silence. She decided to call him Max. Max slept for hours that night, curled up on an old pillow Emily placed beside her bed, his tiny chest rising and falling softly, the sound of rain fading into the distance outside. Emily lay awake longer than usual, listening to the quiet breathing of the little puppy, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spreading through the house. It had been months since she had felt anything close to peace. In the morning, sunlight spilled through the window, painting the walls gold. Max stirred, stretching his legs before toppling off the pillow with a small yelp that made Emily laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. She poured some warm milk again, and this time added a small handful of soaked bread pieces, hoping it would fill his belly a little more. Max ate with the kind of hunger only strays knew, his tail wagging for the first time since she found him. That tiny wag hit Emily harder than she expected. It felt like trust. Over the next few days, Max began to follow her everywhere, his little paws clicking across the floor as he tried to keep up. Emily had work at the bookstore downtown, and each evening when she returned home, Max would come tumbling toward her from the door as if she had been gone for years instead of hours. He was still shy around strangers, but with Emily he was slowly unfolding like a flower, learning the world wasn't all storms and hunger. One evening about 2 weeks later, Emily decided to take Max to the vet for a checkup. He had grown stronger, his coat shinier, but she wanted to be sure there were no hidden illnesses from his time alone. The vet, Dr. Harris, was a kind middle-aged man who examined Max carefully while the puppy sat stiffly on the table, his big eyes darting nervously. "He's underweight but healthy," Dr. Harris said, finally smiling. "A few more weeks of good food and care and he'll be a completely different dog." Emily felt relief wash over her. She bought some recommended puppy food on the way home and even a small collar with a tag that read Max in neat letters. That night when she clipped the collar around his neck, Max tilted his head, as if sensing this meant he belonged somewhere now, as if the world had finally said, "Yes, you have a home." But life wasn't done testing them. One rainy evening, not long after Max had settled into his new life, Emily received a call from her landlord. There had been complaints about dogs in the building. He reminded her pets technically weren't allowed, though he had overlooked it so far. "I'm sorry, Emily, but rules are rules," he said, sounding apologetic but firm. "You'll have to find another place for the dog," or he didn't finish the sentence, but Emily understood. She hung up, feeling cold all over. Max, who had been chewing on a sock, looked up at her, wagging his tail, unaware of the threat hanging over him. That night, Emily sat on the couch watching him sleep, her chest tight with fear. She had just found him, just started to feel like her life was stitched back together, and now this. She couldn't give him up. The thought alone made her eyes sting. The next morning, Emily started searching for pet-friendly apartments, though her budget was tight. Every phone call seemed to end the same way: too expensive, too far away, or already taken. Days passed, the landlord's patience thinning with each one. Max sensed the tension following her from room to room, his usual playful energy subdued. One evening, as she sat surrounded by apartment listings and rejection emails, Max climbed into her lap, pressing his warm little body against hers. Emily buried her face in his fur, whispering, "I'm not losing you too. I promise." She didn't know how, but she meant it. The following week became a blur of work phone calls and sleepless nights as Emily tried to find a solution. The landlord had given her 2 more weeks before he would take action, words that felt like a threat every time she replayed them in her head. Each evening, Max sat beside her as she scrolled through endless listings, his head resting on her lap, his eyes following the flicker of the screen as if he understood everything. Sometimes Emily would take him on long walks just to clear her head. The small town of Willow Creek had a park by the river where children played in the afternoons and old men sat on benches watching the water. Max loved it there, his tail wagging whenever ducks floated by or leaves skittered across the path. Watching him run through the grass, ears too big for his head, paws clumsy but determined, Emily felt the weight on her chest grow heavier. How could anyone expect her to give him up now? One evening at the park, Emily met Sarah, a woman in her late 20s with a golden retriever named Daisy. The dogs sniffed each other, tails wagging cautiously before Max tried to mimic Daisy's playful bow. Sarah laughed, striking up a conversation with Emily about their pets. When Emily mentioned her apartment troubles, Sarah frowned. "There's a small cottage for rent near the edge of town," she said. "It's old, but the owner doesn't mind pets. My cousin lived there last year before moving to the city. I can give you the number." Emily's heart leapt. It felt like the first ray of hope in days. She called the number that evening, speaking to a kindly older man named Mr. Jenkins, who explained the rent was modest, the place unfurnished, but yes, pets were welcome. Emily drove out the next morning to see it. The cottage was small, with peeling paint and a yard that needed work, but sunlight streamed through the windows and the air smelled of pine from the nearby woods. Standing there, Emily could already picture Max racing through the grass, barking at squirrels, tail wagging like crazy. She signed the papers that afternoon, emptying most of her savings but feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Moving day came quickly. Emily packed her few belongings into the truck while Max trotted around, nervously confused by the boxes but excited by the energy in the air. When they arrived at the cottage, Max bounded through the door, sniffing every corner before darting outside to the yard as if he had lived there his whole life. Emily laughed, watching him chase a butterfly across the grass, his paws kicking up little clouds of dust. That night they ate dinner on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. Max curled beside her, chewing a bone she had bought to celebrate the new house. For the first time since her father's death, Emily felt like life was moving forward, like she was building something instead of just surviving each day. But the world rarely lets happiness settle without testing it. A month after the move, Emily came home from work to find Max limping across the yard, whining softly. Panic surged through her as she ran to him, noticing the cut on his paw, deep and bleeding. She scooped him into the truck, hands shaking as she drove to the nearest vet clinic. Max whimpered quietly, his eyes never leaving hers, as if asking her to fix it. "Please fix it." The vet explained it was likely a piece of glass from the broken bottle they found near the fence. The cut needed stitches, but he would be okay. Emily sat beside him the whole time, whispering softly while the vet worked. When it was over, Max rested his head on her lap, groggy but safe. Driving home that night, Emily realized just how much he meant to her, how much he had become part of her heartbeat, her days, her home. He wasn't just a dog, he was family. The weeks after Max's injury were a mixture of worry and relief. Emily followed the vet's instructions, carefully cleaning the wound each day, keeping him from running too much, though Max didn't make it easy. He hated staying still, always trying to sneak out the door whenever she wasn't looking, his big brown eyes pleading for just one run across the grass. Slowly, the cut healed, leaving only a faint scar on his paw, a reminder of the night Emily realized she couldn't imagine life without him. Summer deepened in Willow Creek, turning the fields golden and the river warm enough for children to splash in. Emily started taking Max on evening walks along the water, watching the sunset paint the sky in orange and pink. He loved the freedom, the open spaces, the chance to chase sticks and bark at birds. Sometimes they would sit on the grass together, Emily leaning back on her elbows, while Max rested beside her, his head on her knee, eyes half closed in the fading light. These were the moments Emily wished she could freeze forever, the quiet peace after so many storms in both their lives. But life had one more challenge waiting, one neither of them saw coming. One Saturday afternoon, as Emily stocked shelves at the bookstore, her phone rang. It was Mr. Jenkins, the cottage owner. "Emily, I'm afraid I have bad news," he said, sounding uneasy. "I've decided to sell the property. I'll give you first option to buy, but if you can't, I'll have to ask you to move by the end of next month." Emily felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Buy. She barely had enough savings for groceries some weeks, let alone a house. She thanked him, voice shaking, and spent the rest of her shift moving books mechanically, her mind spinning. That evening she sat on the porch watching Max chase fireflies unaware of the storm brewing over their heads. She couldn't put him through another move, another uncertain future. She needed a plan, something that would give them both stability. That night Emily stayed up late searching online for loans, cheap properties, anything that might help. Most options felt impossible, until she stumbled across a small business grant program for locals wanting to start community projects. The idea formed slowly like dawn breaking. The bookstore had a dusty back room filled with unused space. What if she turned it into a reading cafe, a place with books, coffee, and maybe even a corner for therapy dogs, including Max once he was trained? It was wild, risky, but it was something. The grant application was long, requiring business plans, budgets, letters of intent. Emily worked on it every night after her shifts. Max curled at her feet as if keeping her grounded. She researched therapy dog programs too, imagining Max one day visiting hospitals or schools, bringing comfort the way he had brought it to her. Weeks passed the deadline for both the grant and the cottage sale, creeping closer like twin wolves. Then one evening, as cicadas hummed outside her window, an email arrived. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The grant was approved. Money enough to launch the cafe, with a small loan option included for buying property if needed. Emily cried right there on the floor, Max licking her face, confused but happy because she was laughing through the tears. She spoke to Mr. Jenkins the next day, explaining everything. He agreed to sell the cottage under a payment plan, the grant covering the first big chunk. It wasn't easy, the paperwork, meetings, bank visits all piling on, but each step felt like bricks building a foundation beneath her life. Through it all, Max stayed by her side, riding in the truck to town, sniffing every corner of the soon-to-be cafe, tail wagging like he already understood this was for both of them. The day the cafe opened, the whole town seemed to show up, curious about the new place on Main Street, with the sign that read Paws and Pages. Emily had spent every evening painting walls, stringing up warm lights, setting mismatched chairs around small wooden tables that once belonged to her grandmother. The smell of fresh coffee and old books filled the air, mixing into something that felt like home the moment people walked through the door. Max had his own corner with a soft rug and a basket of toys, wearing a little vest that said Therapy Dog in Training. Children flocked to him, instantly sitting cross-legged as they read aloud while he rested his head on their knees, tail thumping slowly. Emily watched it all from behind the counter, heart so full she thought it might burst. Months passed, and the cafe grew into more than a business. It became a gathering place for lonely souls and lively families, for students needing quiet corners and old men wanting coffee with company. Emily hosted book readings, writing workshops, even adoption events with the local shelter. Max was always there, greeting people, nudging shy kids until they giggled, keeping old ladies company as they sipped tea. It was as if he understood this was his job, spreading the comfort he had once so desperately needed himself. Then one autumn afternoon, a letter arrived from the regional paper, saying they wanted to feature Paws and Pages in their weekend edition. The reporter came with a camera, snapping photos of Max posing like a professional, while Emily laughed, telling their story from the stormy night she found him to the day the grant changed everything. The article brought more visitors, donations, offers to help expand the therapy dog program. Emily used part of the funds to start free reading hours at the local children's hospital. Max, lying patiently beside kids hooked up to IVs, listening to them stumble through picture books. Nurses said the visits made the children smile more, eat better, even sleep easier. Max seemed to know when to be gentle, when to nuzzle a tiny hand, when to simply lie there offering quiet company. One evening after a hospital visit, Emily sat in the cafe long after closing, running her fingers through Max's fur. "You know you've changed everything, right?" she whispered. Max leaned into her hand, eyes half closed. He didn't need to understand the words. The warmth in her voice was enough. But life, even in its brightest seasons, carries shadows at the edges. That winter Max began limping again, at first just after long days, then even on short walks. Emily took him to the vet, heart sinking when X-rays showed early hip dysplasia, common in shepherds. "It's manageable," Dr. Harris assured her. "Meds, exercise adjustments, maybe surgery later if needed." Emily nodded, blinking back tears. Max had given so much to so many people. The thought of him in pain felt unbearable. She set up a care routine: pain medication, gentle walks, swimming, therapy at the lake in summer. The community rallied to fundraising for future surgery costs, posting updates online, where dozens of families shared how Max had touched their lives. Through it all, Max remained himself, tail wagging whenever kids arrived at the cafe, ears perking up when Emily grabbed his leash for walks, even if slower ones now. It was as if he refused to let pain steal the joy he carried. Spring returned to Willow Creek, and with it the soft smell of new grass and blooming flowers. Max's coat had grown thicker over the winter, and despite the slow walks he loved lying in the sun, tail wagging whenever Emily sat beside him. The cafe had become a second home, not just for them but for the town. People often stopped by not just for coffee or books but to see Max, the little shepherd who had stolen everyone's hearts. Emily would watch him greet every visitor, gently nudging children to pet him, allowing the elderly to rest their hands on his back. Each small gesture seemed to carry all the gratitude and love he had learned from her. But one day a storm approached. Dark clouds rolled in faster than anyone expected, the river rising and the wind thrashing the trees. Emily rushed to close the cafe, worried for the safety of her little town and for Max. As they stepped outside, Max hesitated, sniffing the air as if sensing the danger before she could. Emily held his leash tight, but he refused to let go of her side, pressing close. The first flash of lightning lit the sky, followed by the roar of thunder. Max whimpered softly, looking up at Emily. She knelt down, brushing mud from his paws. "We'll be okay, Max, I promise." The rain began in sheets, soaking them both, but Max stayed close, trembling against her warmth. They ran to the truck, sliding through the mud, arriving home soaked but safe. That night, as the storm raged outside, Emily held Max close, feeling the tiny rise and fall of his chest. She whispered to him stories of their journey, from the rain-soaked ditch to this home they had built together. Max seemed to listen, his eyes half closed, trusting completely. In that moment, Emily realized something she had known but never said aloud. This little shepherd had saved her just as much as she had saved him. Through storms, uncertainty, and fear, they had found each other, and together they had healed. Life was not perfect, but in their bond there was peace, love, and hope. And Max, the tiny German shepherd who had once shivered alone under a log, now slept safely beside her, dreaming of endless fields, warm sunshine, and a future filled with joy. Give me 16 pictures, attractive prompt with species names.